Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true firsthand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. So oftentimes, men find themselves challenged with the modern-day world and its lack of rites of passage. These rites of passage have traditionally allowed men to transition from boyhood to adulthood and have gone back for thousands of years. In many cases, these rites of passage included psychedelics, and because of their illegality today, many men have had to discover new ways to form modern-day rites of passage so they can move deeper into maturity as men. Today's guest on the show is an expert in the realms of fitness, men's work, and leadership skills, and is someone I am extremely excited to chat about his experience with psychedelic medicines, the role they have played in his development as a man and human being as a whole, and what he has noticed in the realm of men's work with regards to rites of passage and psychedelic medicines. With all that being said, please give me a hand in welcoming my brother Chase Tolleson to the show. Chase, I am so excited to have you here, man. What's going on in your world?
I got chills, brother. Your chills are second to none.
Hell yes. Well, then I did my job correct. We can end the episode right now. Short and sweet, right? But, I'm really excited to have you on and be able to chat about, really how psychedelics have helped shape you as a man, right? I know that having journeyed with you before and knowing your experience with psychedelics, I'm really excited to get into this. And a great thing that I love to start every episode in this podcast by doing is checking in with how you were first introduced to psychedelics and how potentially your mindset around them shifted from boyhood to adulthood. And what I mean by that is I grew up with the DARE program. I imagine you did too, like learning that these things were bad, acid would rot your brain, this is your brain on drugs, things like that. So I love following the journey of what took you from DARE class to saying yes to your first psychedelic experience. Bring us down that journey, man.
It's a beautiful way to open.
Yes.
So it all started with marijuana, cannabis.
Yes. Good old Mary Jane.
Year of high school. And me and my buddy bought a bag of swaggy dirt weed off of somebody at school. And we smoked it out of a foil pipe, back in the day, making pipes out of foil. And that kicked off like my exploration. I was cannabis heavy through high school. Junior year of high school, I had the drug rug poncho, Discman, Walkman, and Pink Floyd, The Wall, Dark Side of the Moon, and Wish You Were Here all in the front pocket so I could cycle through those albums throughout the day.
Oh, yeah.
and I believe it was senior year, because these guys were a year behind me and they could drive as well. So senior year of high school, I was first introduced to acid, LSD. And it was a couple of my buddies. They come by and they're like, hey, we just dropped some acid and we still have one hit left. You want it? And it was the most juvenile, way to go about it. First experience, what is set and setting, and they ended up taking off. I drove before I came up on it. I drove to and from Blockbuster. I was getting a little giggly on the way back. They leave. My mom comes home and I'm sitting there on the couch next to my mom and she's watching Sling Blade. Billy Bob Thornton. Yeah. And I started coming up. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm going to grab that other movie on the island and go upstairs to my room and watch it. I didn't check what this other movie was. It was The Day After Tomorrow with Dennis Quaid.
Oh, Jesus.
So here I am, 17 years old, on a strong hit of acid, watching an apocalyptic movie.
Talk about being thrown into the gauntlet.
Yes. Yeah, I had my buddy on the phone. I was like, what is going on? Why did I take this and watch this movie? The world is ending. It was, thrown into the gauntlet head first.
Yeah, that's wild, man. And, for every psychedelic connector listening, I'm careful to say user, right? Mm-hmm. The language game. But for every person who loves psychedelics listening, I bet you can all remember your first drug rug poncho, and mine, actually, I got at Electric Forest. I still have it. It's purple, black, and there's almost nothing. It's very traditional. I feel like to be on a psychedelic, and get the chills and throw on a drug rug, So it was amazing that you added that in because it's such a pivotal moment for every person who loves psychedelics to have that connection with their first drug rug. and
Yes.
and it's so funny. And you mentioned like Dark Side of the Moon and different types of music. And this is something I feel psychedelics are so good at doing, is allowing music to act as the carrier wave for emotion. Because typically, and I'm so excited we get to talk about this because you know story work extremely well. And it's like, so is if someone asks like, hey, Chase, how are you doing? Right? The second you're asked that question, unconsciously, your ego is running through and your subconscious are running through tons of different patterns to go, okay, how do we protect Chase in this situation? And then what comes out? Good. No matter how good you're actually doing. Right. And so what music I see being the big gift there is that you can hear a song and it just unlocks an emotion and it bypasses the whole like trying to make sense of it part. And that I love so much. And so I'm curious, what in your experiences with psychedelics has music allowed for you?
We had a 5-disc CD changer in the basement. And once I got into psychedelics in high school, we would get mushrooms and we'd have a couple guys over and we'd eat a couple eighths of mushrooms and not a couple eighths per person.
Yeah, that's an experience to an ordeal,
But we also would have a teenage psilocybin night. And in that 5-disc changer was those same Pink Floyd CDs on repeat. And to this day, when I listen to Pink Floyd, it's often bliss. It's a remembrance of a connection. And I had this, I'm so glad you went here with this.
Yeah.
Pink Floyd, Run, Rabbit, Run, dig that hole, get the sun. When at last the work is done, don't sit down. It's time to dig another one. Like, who am I? I'm the guy that has decided he wants to coach men to get out of the rat race. Like, okay, let's look at where that came from. I'm on psychedelics multiple times listening to that specific track. Abracadabra.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah. And, something I actually had this happen last night and it was very interesting. I had interacted with some cannabis and I think there was a glitch in the matrix or something because I got up, we were watching the show Outer Banks. Like, for everyone who thinks Netflix is overrated, come on, every once in a while they have a good show. But we were watching it and I got up and there was just this about 5-minute span where I could almost just tell that life was a movie. Like there was like something happening in my vision. It wasn't like a blurry vision or anything like that. It was just this almost qualitative quality where I just felt like this is all a movie. And I started really being able to tell my role in it, the extras roles, and all of these things. And, what you were mentioning there with, Pink Floyd and all these different things, there are these times in my life that my life has seemed just like that, a movie. And I've been able to look back and go, oh my goodness, like you were talking about, those lyrics in that song were foreshadowing what's going to happen in the movie. And it's so interesting how this stuff works, right? And so I'm curious, have you had experiences like that where you've been interacting with any type of psychedelic or plant medicine, even cacao, and you've had glitches in that matrix? And if so, what have those glitches looked like for you? Have they looked like life looking like a movie? What's kind of the strangest things that have happened to you on psychedelics that have made you think, is this all an illusion?
Yes. As context, this happened years after the story I'm about to share. And Gaia, it's the series Psychedelics, season 1. When I was first watching that and I was listening to it when I was on walks, I texted my brother. I was like, that feeling that this is all a curtain and there's more behind it is stronger than ever right now. And to that point, the first time that I really leaned into that and more or less the rite of passage that you were talking about earlier, I believe rites of passage back then, going out and fighting a bear, living in the wilderness. There's more to life, essentially. I shared this story with you the first time we met. LSD, 17 years old, I believe, maybe 18. And my buddy and I had dropped a couple hits for, not kaleidoscope, still here and fully in it.
Yeah, fully pitted.
Fully pitted. And we get a call from one of our buddies. Hey, come on over here. You guys can hang out here. He's got a cool little spot. And we're like, all right. And we started walking there. And I slap a leaf on a tree. It's 2:30 in the morning, by the way. And I slap a leaf on a tree as we're going down the sidewalk. And instantaneously, a car alarm goes off a couple miles away. We both have our minds blown right at that point. I'm like, man, it's like it's only to look and not to touch. And then as soon as I say that, this weird warm gust of wind blows up. And then a couple minutes later, I'm like, it's cool because we're walking and we're seeing different stuff, but we put this all here. It's all the same. And half a second later, a rabbit runs across the sidewalk like 10 feet in front of us. Here's something different. And we were so enthralled with that we forgot where we were going. Like we forgot that we had a destination, which put a note in that.
Yeah.
And we turned around. We went back to my parents' house where we had been hanging out, and we were on the back porch, leaning back in the chairs, looking up at the stars and speaking philosophy. Life this, life that. Here's the meaning. Why is this? It's all a circle. And I'm leaning back at the stars, and we go quiet for a second. And it was like, whoa. And I had it, like everything that you unlock on a deep, on like the sixth pen of 5-MeO DMT.
Yeah.
I had it at 17 years old. And I sat up, and the synchronicities continued because I sat up and I went to share it with my buddy, and my phone vibrated. And I reached into my pocket and I silenced it. And it was like I was given that information.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
It was only for me. And the fact that I was going to share it was like, oh, wait, maybe we were wrong and you're not quite ready for that. And that phone vibration at like 3:30 in the morning was our buddy wondering where we were. So I silenced it. I go to tell my buddy who I was with in person, and it was gone. Absolutely gone. I was like, I just had it. I just had my hands on the Holy Grail. I had it, and it's gone now. And you want to talk about rite of passage, like that lingering sense had been with me for years after that, until it was until I tapped into 5-MeO twice that I was like, okay, this is what I was told that night.
Yeah. And I love what you talked about there, because I feel for so many people who interact with psychedelics, I know for me, put it that way to make it more personal, as soon as I'm in that complete right brain like experience of just the knowing of everything, I didn't need any intellect. I don't exactly know what I know, but I know that I know it. And I start trying to piece it together and I jump back into the left brain. All of that right brain starts fading away. And I'm like, but wait. And I'm trying to grasp for it. And now what I've realized is that is the gift of true presence, right? When you're in those experiences, you have the ability to understand what it felt like for our ancestors to actually live, right? And what it feels like for us to live. I mean, we're very similar to our ancestors. We just have more clouds in our sky, if you will, right? More interaction, more distraction, more things like that. And so, that's been something that I've tuned into a lot over the years, is like, yeah, what are these qualities that I'm feeling? And what I've come to is that now when I interact with psychedelics, I know that I'm going to get to that point depending on the size of the dose and what medicine I'm interacting with. And now it's like, I don't need to understand it. All I need to know is to remember to bring back the faith. And I think that's where religion can do so many amazing things. But the challenge is that religion has been made and remade rather into a left brain activity rather than a right brain activity, right? Where people now are logicking God, logicking source, logicking the universe, when really none of that has any logic to it, right? It's an experience. As Paul Chek says, life is not an observation sport, right? You can learn and learn and learn. And another great quote, intellectualism is a common cover-up for fear of direct experience, right? Don't let your schooling get in the way of your education. All of these things are speaking to exactly what we're talking about right now, where there's this aspect of human beings that we, especially as men that are praised for intellect, and women too, of course, right? We live in a very masculine society where everything is left brain, and we're praised on our talent, not our grit, all of these things, it can be very challenging to, interact with these medicines and be present, because the second you get there and you start learning some stuff, you're like, I need to write all this down, and that's when it starts getting lost. And so I'm curious, you mentioned 5-MeO DMT, and this is something that you and I have both experienced together. And I'd love for you to try to articulate the complete unarticulatable, if that's a word, because there's nothing there that actually we can describe. And I love trying to get people to do it. So like, what would you say compared to your other psychedelic experiences, 5-MeO DMT was like? Was it more, was it just intensified version of what you felt on things like LSD, or was it something totally different?
Totally. So I have experience with LSD. I have more experience with psilocybin, and more recently have tapped into 5-MeO a couple times as diving into. LSD and psilocybin both, even on big doses, I can stay in that left brain and I go philosophy mode. And I'm trying to think and make sense of it. 5-MeO I've interacted with twice. And the first time, zero visuals, pure energy flowing through my body, verbal purging, like a Tibetan, like Om frequency flowing out of me.
Yeah.
And I described it as the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. And it was bliss, that first one. And then I realized I'd only went halfway. The second time, oh man, I got to the point where I went the first time and I had already set the intention to go further, to go all the way. And it was a good thing I had. And when I went further, and I'll recount my story because I was unaware when I first got into 5-MeO that I was going to be moving and making noise. And the left brain goes away. The right brain connection to being, I've heard you say before, we're all so busy doing, we forget we're human beings.
Yes.
The connection to being, that's all you can do is be. Yeah, you're doing the being. And the second time I got up there and I was like, I'm laying on my back, and for anybody listening, if you can picture this, I reached straight up into the ether and let out this powerful, like, and then arms dropped to my side, and the visuals were more intense. And they say 5-MeO isn't visual. It's not visual in the sense of like NN-DMT. You're seeing entities.
Yeah. Sacred geometry, stuff like that.
Yeah. I still got some geometry, like lines and colors. Look at the Rainbow Bridge, if you will. And when I was laying there with my arms out, I didn't see it. I didn't touch it. I didn't feel it. I melted into whatever you want to call it, source consciousness, oneness, being. I melted into it and I sat there in the ether for I don't know how long. and a part of me feels like I'm still there. Part of me feels, to your point about the right brain, about feeling it, I carried that feeling out of that experience. And I sat up and it's like, oh, this is my full potential. And if I may continue on this diatribe, that was so powerful that that happened semi-recently. And I took a little bit off of any plants. I had no cannabis. I was microdosing psilocybin leading up to that. No psilocybin, no cannabis, no LSD. The most I'm doing is like some CBD or kratom right now. And my meditations have been off the charts. Like breathing coming to me and getting up out of that one, the breath came to me. My wife was meditating facing me. She said she opened her eyes during it, closed them again. And I'm sitting there with my hands on my knees, right? When she closes her eyes, she could see my being. My hands weren't on my knees. They were reaching straight up into the sky. And I left for a walk after that one, and it was giggle purging, just laughing. I had another one a week later. And this one, I'm home alone, sitting in the middle of my living room floor, and the breath came to me. And then the ohms, like from my first 5-MeO experience to that level, like natural ohms flowing through me, channeling something or purging something. And then the ohms turned into snarls and growls and like inner savage coming out full force. And then that settled back down, and I laid down with my arms out like I had been with this last 5-MeO experience. And next thing I know, I can feel both hands being held by something on either side. And I haven't interacted with anything since. So you want to talk about connecting to being.
Yes. Yeah. And what I love that you perfectly illustrated there is that what these medicines are just that, a medicine, right? You don't need to necessarily interact with this medicine to get to that place that you go, right? That just the medicines show you it's possible, right? They break you out of your what is possible and what is impossible type mindset. So then you can then find that path again in any state you want. And I 100% agree with you. There is something that has been happening since the first time I interacted with 5-MeO DMT, and I've interacted with lots of different medicines, but for specifically that medicine did something. And just yesterday, right, I hadn't done breath work in about 4 or 5 days. I went to California and just, been flying around and whatnot. And so I did breath work, right? And I just did a Wim Hof 30 breath and just hold and not even squeeze. Like I literally knew that I might blast off pretty hard because I've been blasting off really hard with that breath work. When I first started it, I could hold, squeeze, do whatever, and I might get a little lightheaded feeling, but nothing. Now, yesterday I do 30 breaths. I'm alone on the vineyard. Rachel had gone to the beach. Her whole family was gone. And I inhale and I do 30 breaths. I inhale and I'm just sitting there and I'm very lightly because how sometimes you can take a full breath in and when you hold it, it kind of puts a little pressure. I was like easing the pressure in, right? Literally white it out. Came back shaking, laughing, like everything comes back into color. I'm like, oh, I'm a human. Oh, my name is Ryan. Okay, like one of those sessions, right? And it's funny because, the first time I ever tried that breathwork style on LSD, that's when breathwork forever changed for me, right? And you've done this before with me, right? Where we've interacted with breath work. And for anyone listening, I do suggest being careful if you're going to do any breath work when you're on a plant medicine, because it will intensify to a level that you almost can't believe. I don't hear this being talked about a lot, but it's a real thing. And it's one of the best ways if you want to go a little deeper, but you don't necessarily want to be strapped in for 8 to 10 hours to go deeper. You can do it in little 15 to 30 second intervals and get a little dose of your own body's 5-MeO and NMDMT mixed together in a cocktail. And, one of the things that I've noticed, and you mentioned laughter a couple of times there, and that old saying, laughter being the best medicine. And I wonder why, right? I wondered, why is laughter the best medicine? And I came up with a couple of different reasons. I came up with number one, especially for men, the universe knew that in our immaturity as a society and as a species, we would omit crying for fear of weakness, for fear of vulnerability, for fear of all these things. So what did it do? It hid the exact same emotional reaction, but with laughter, like how excitement is anxiety, right? Depending on what story. If you think about when you're doubling over laughing, it's the exact same as crying, like 100%. It's the same thing. All it changes the story. So it's a way to bypass and get that energy out without necessarily having to cry. And furthermore, this is what I realized when we were doing breath work on LSD the first time. We would all come back at the same time, like be gone for like 10 seconds, completely gone. We'd come back in and it would be a gut reaction to just start laughing, like hysterically, and no one knew. And we were all laughing even harder because we knew that we had no reason when our logical mind kicked back on, like, why are we laughing? And what we came up with was that we realized how silly it is that we fear death, and how death, like Ram Dass says, is like taking off a tight shoe, and how it's the easiest, most fun thing ever, right? Actually, I know it sounds morbid, but when you die, and this is what I believe you go through when you do 5-MeO DMT, you realize the other side is so much bliss, it's almost hard to comprehend, right? That's why my body fidgets. I don't even know where to put all of that when I'm there. It's challenging. It's how do I fit all this in my body? And, that feeling, right, of the fear that I get when I'm going that far out, I do feel like fear is healthy. For anyone listening who might have had challenges with fear and psychedelics, yeah, it's a healthy thing. It's your left brain making sure you're not going to die, right? That's why it's so important to be interacting with them in the right set and setting. And I believe that's where faith comes in. And, I'm curious for you as a man who's doing men's work, how have psychedelics helped you be more comfortable with being uncomfortable, and also have more faith that it will all be okay in the end?
Be more comfortable with being uncomfortable and have more faith it'll be okay in the end. I want you to cite those so I remember to answer.
Yes.
So on the being more comfortable with being uncomfortable, the plants will show you what you need to see, what will serve your journey. And a lot of us are shying away from that. So that uncomfortable shit that is showing you, when you lean into it, you come out the other side of that experience a stronger man, a stronger individual, and more aware of where you have a massive opportunity to take quantum leaps forward. That's, in a nutshell, what it has done for me. I had one psilocybin journey in particular, and it was a friend of mine, and we kept one of us would be coming down and then the other one would talk. And we kept each other up because we were going in waves and we were both trying to come down. And I went upstairs and we separated. I left him in the basement. I went upstairs and went to bed. And I was like, oh, I woke up the next morning, like that's symbolic. Like we're creating this spiral of lifestyle. And I was like, I need to step away from this dynamic if I'm going to move forward. So the plants will show you what you need to see. More comfortable with uncomfortable. And
the other one was how that has allowed you to have more faith that, quote unquote, the other side is always worth it, right? Say if you're doing an ice bath, right? And you haven't done psychedelics, I can imagine like moving through that is more challenging, right? But when you understand psychedelics in a way that, yeah, things might get a little real. And then I'm going to find another lesson on the other side if I surrender and and look at what I'm afraid of. How has that helped you in running a business, in owning your life, in doing men's work, and all the things that are like literally uncomfortable, right? Like growing is uncomfortable. Think about the gym. It's uncomfortable, right? But I'm curious how psychedelics have helped you in the rest of your life with evolving.
Yeah, that's right. You phrased it the first time in that everything's going to be okay, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, beautiful. I had a specific download on psilocybin one time and it was around that specific journey. And I was with my brother and I was like, man, it's, we have to be here for it. We have to have our hands on the reins and we have to accept it as it comes and be ready for whatever this throws at us. We have to be willing to step with it full force and hold it and carry that space. And in the same vein, that carries to life. Like as soon as that came out of my mouth, I was like, oh, I'm not talking about the trip. I'm talking about life. And we have, like Byron Katie said, if you're always looking for the answers, you won't, or if you're always asking questions, you won't be ready for the answer when it comes. And psychedelics have taught me that massively. Be ready for what life brings you and lean into your intuition around it. Because when we trust our right brain that everything will be okay and take out that left brain, well, what if this? Well, what if that? Well, what if this? And that's where the language game comes in. Well, what if everything goes absolutely the way that it's supposed to? And the journey that you're in right now is just the world. Life's the biggest trip of them all. So if you get shown something, it's on purpose and it's there for you to address. And the more that you run away from it, the worse it's going to get. I have seen people run away from stuff, as I'm sure you have, as they're coming down from a trip. And this is this little micro, it's like 5 years of their lives condensed into like an hour because they're coming down and they're off that bliss level. And next thing you know, their mind is back to left brain and they're still out there where everything's coming to them that they've shut off. And for an hour, they're crying and they're wondering why this is going on. And they just want to come down and take me to the hospital. And it's exactly what they needed to see. They wake up the next morning feeling better because it was what they need to see. And you need to integrate that. You can't just go through a bad trip and leave it. What did you see? What was told to you? Same vein, take that into life. What are you seeing? What's holding you back? What's pissing you off? Where are you held back right now? Look at it and then address it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I love what you said there, that life is a psychedelic. I mean, people used to say to me, like, life can be a psychedelic experience. And when you think about it, I mean, there are things that happen, especially like think about when a family member passes on or something like that, where the uncomfortability of that and the challenge that comes with that. I mean, hell, the challenge with a job interview, right? Like, or starting your own business, all of those things can be so challenging in nature. And, one of the things that I'm so aware of is that in my own life, I've had many patterns and programs that have ended up running unconsciously in the background. And when I interact with psychedelics, it gives me a chance to control, alt delete that and step outside of it and be able to see it from a non-judgmental point of view. And that's what you are articulating great there with the crying and all of that stuff that otherwise, especially as men, like I had some stories around what crying was and, all of those things. And now I'm able to, interact with crying in a totally different way where I actually know that vulnerability is strength, not because I read it in a book, but because I experienced it myself. And I experienced that feeling of being alone, right? Being quote unquote alone, and which is a sign that you're in desperate need of yourself to begin with. And then from there, I was able to really tap into that and realize that, yeah, I have my own back. And that lesson has allowed me to move throughout every stage of my life where you know what it's like running your own business and doing podcasts and all that stuff. I mean, it's challenging, right? Like I still get butterflies before I hit record in every episode. I still get butterflies before every single sales call I hop on and coaching call. And I know because I've got the reps in with psychedelics, with, self-development programs, with fitness, with all of these things that allow you to experience the beauty of delayed gratification, that it will be all okay on the other side. And one of the things you mentioned there, right? Like, or the vibe that I was getting is the importance for men, especially, to be able to access their wild self, right? Don Miguel Ruiz talks about that in the Fifth Agreement. And this is something that I feel masculinity is in such need of, especially in the world where quote unquote toxic masculinity is a thing, which actually isn't true. It's simply immature. It's the version of the immature masculine. And some people will say, well, what does it really matter? It's the same thing. It's like, no, it's not, because immature gives a totally different story than toxic. Toxic inherently means that something is not right. Immature means something is at a certain stage and can develop, right? So it gives possibility. And it, begs the question, in your own life, are you arguing for your limitations or your possibilities? Because that is where your life takes shape. And you can start to notice that when you're in psychedelic experiences. And, I'm curious for you, what have been, if there's been any, I imagine there has, what has been one of the times in which you've interacted with psychedelics and seen something that you've been like, you know what? Yeah, I'm out of alignment with my core values there. I'm out of alignment with, who I want to be showing up as a man. And, what was that process like of moving through that? Do you remember the exact lesson or an exact time where maybe something just felt uncomfortable? Because I know that a lot of times it's not actually going to be like, oh, I know exactly what the limiting belief was. But do you remember one time that was challenging and you were able to move through, and what got you through that?
Exactly like you're framing it. It didn't occur to me at the time until you just asked this question that this was something that was brought up. I thought I was just fried and wanted to go home and see my wife. And the first time I interacted with 5-MeO, I then did 2 hits of LSD overnight. And I woke up the next morning and I was supposed to go home the next day. And like a whole day after, I was supposed to have 24 more hours where I was. And I was like, I miss my wife. I miss my dogs. I want to go hug my wife. I want to be there for her. I want to be present as a husband. And I switched my flight and I went home and I started being more present. And there was, to your point, it was a feeling. It wasn't an addressing, oh, hey, this came up. I realized that I have an opportunity to be more present as a husband. No, it was this internal, very right brain consciousness, subconscious calling from the eternal ether consciousness.
Yeah. And what I got there was, I know one of the highest traits of the mature masculine is being able to hold space, right? Not necessarily because someone needs it, but just having that ability. And it sounds like what you went through in that experience was realizing that you could hold better space, and that it wasn't like this, oh, I feel lack, so I have to run to that. It was like, I'm excited, aka arguing for my possibilities, that I can fix this and I can do this better. And why wait an extra 24 hours? Because nothing is guaranteed. I'm going to start right now. And you made that call. And for so many men, especially, like that can be so challenging, right? Like, because first of all, we're never taught how to be men at all in today's society, especially in the Western world. I imagine there are still many cultures that do it, but we're taught, I get into a wormhole here, but we're taught everything that's just random facts, right? We're not taught how to learn. We're taught what to learn. We're not taught how to be a man. We're taught what a man is, right? And these things box us in so much.
And does some of that come from the removal of psychedelics? Because to your point about religion being valuable, early religions, early civilizations had psychedelics like yahe, ayahuasca, peyote, like even cannabis, mushrooms. I always pronounce it wrong. The fly agaric.
Amanita muscaria.
Amanita muscaria. Yeah. And like that, there's a whole winter solstice ritual around that one.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these early civilizations had the tools and they used them. So yeah, when we shut off our connection to ourselves, to our being of centered, and now the only way to access that, thanks to a lot of rules and regulation, is taking the time that a lot of people don't believe they have to implement a meditation and journaling or reflection practice. And then it's still going to take you years yeah, it makes sense that there's a lot of immature masculine out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like the funniest point, is how silly and how immature we are as a society. And that's when I see it, right? When you like actually think about the fact that human beings are outlawing nature, and yet we're the most civilized thing. It's laughable. Like it's literally comedic because, these people think that they're book smart and all of these things, their book smarts rather, and all of these things are going to be able to, really allow them to move through life. And really all it is, being in the future or the past, right? Because these things are like, okay, I'll learn this so I can use it then. I'll learn this so I can use it then. Oh, I did this in my past. I want to learn something so I don't go back to that, right? So everyone's running from what they don't want, but very few are running towards what they want. And we know with the language game, that whole thing is so important because when you're running away from what you don't want, you're a victim, right? And think about with the masculine, especially, how well are you going to be able to show up as a husband, brother, father, etc., if you're running away from your life's problems? And if you think your kids can't feel that, if you think your wife can't feel it, if you think your friends can't feel that, they can, right? There's nothing bad, right? Binary language, very strategic and acknowledged and accepted. There is nothing wrong with admitting that you're doing a lot of shit and it's scary, right? Like there's nothing wrong with that. And that's so important for men to realize because, we do have a lot of things that we balance in life. I know, speaking for myself, I know you do too. And being able to just celebrate that win of like, yeah, I am strong and I'm doing a lot of stuff and that's awesome. And sometimes I cry about it. Sometimes I vent about it. Sometimes I, check in with it. Sometimes I don't handle it well. And sometimes I quote unquote mess up. All of those things are okay. And for me, the training ground for that's been more potent than anything is psychedelics because they're messy as hell, right? Like there are times, especially like you mentioned psilocybin a couple times, where psilocybin is very messy for me. And that's why I love it so much. Every time I do a 5-gram tea, which is like my complete emotional douching dose, right? Mm-hmm. If you will, it's messy. I mean, there's times where I'm shaking uncontrollably and vibrating. There's times where I feel like I'm going to puke. Sometimes I do puke. There's times where I'm laughing. There's times where I'm crying. I'm just surrendered to how it's going to look, because when I try to control it, that's when things go awry, and that's what I try to avoid. And I'm curious for you, like, what have been some of the times in which things have gone awry? Has there ever been a time where you felt terrified and you've had to call on faith to be able to move you through that?
We do such a good job of filtering this stuff out once we've learned from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Taking some pondering. And there was another time on LSD when I was younger, and it may have been spawned by the fact that the guys that we were hanging out with decided to run off into the cornfield while we were hanging out with them and then start messing with us. So it sent me into this.
Oh my God. Yeah. Cue every kids signs nightmare, like that movie Signs. Yeah. Get out of here with that.
Oh, backtrack. I got one. Mm-hmm. And it was psilocybin. And oh, dude, I don't even remember what happened.
Those are always the good ones.
So driving around with my buddy was going to trip sit me, and I ate about 4 grams, mm-hmm. and we're smoking some cannabis. There may have been something else on the cannabis, and we go back to his house. And he puts on a movie, and we're in his room in his parents' basement, which was in a basement. You got the window well on one side, the egress window. And then the other wall of his room was blanket. And then there was drywall along the back. So blankets on the left, drywall behind me, window well to the right, TV in front of me. And I'm looking at this TV, and he puts on Pirates of the fucking Caribbean. And like, haha, this would be a good trip movie. Dude, when they started turning into skeletons in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
That's at that point, the window well turned into a fire escape, and I was no longer in a basement. I was in an apartment, like multiple stories up, and the blankets turned into like a wall with a door in them. And I still had enough awareness. I'm like, dude, you gotta take me home. Like, these next few hours are gonna go. And okay, next thing I remember, I'm standing at the top of the stairs, and I hear this Chase. And I look, and he's by his front door with his shoes on, his keys in his hand. He's like, you all right? I remember walking into my parents' house, and my mom's there, and she's coming downstairs, and I'm going up, and I look at her, I'm like, why are you crying? She's like, I'm not, I'm fine. I'm like, no, you're crying. Your eyes are, she's like, Chase, I'm fine. Why you? I'm like, oh, too much. Like, too much what? Mushrooms. And I go up to my room, 18, 19 at this point. I go up to my room, and I lay down in my bed, And the next thing I remember is, at this point, I was still smoking cigarettes, is smoking a cigarette with my mom in the garage 5 hours later. And it was intense. Like I know that I was curled up in those covers, like running from it. The specifics, unless we go back in time, put a camera in my room, who knows?
Yeah.
Part of me remembers like getting up and going around the house like this, and it's never been brought up by my mom. But then again, I think she's the type of person that wouldn't bring it up, like for fear of embarrassing me. And I just want to know what my trip was like. And when I came to, there's some massive sense of a weight being lifted, of something. I just went through the fold. Like, it was a hero's journey in 6 hours, and the mushroom was the guide. And I went through the pit of despair, and I came up out the other side. And yeah, that story wraps that up. Like that was the most challenging psychedelic experience I've ever had.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's interesting that, you were able to chat with your mom on that journey, right? Because, we get into the challenges that come when parents try to restrict things or judge certain things. And, one of the things that is so funny to me is that we were chatting about a second ago, when people look at psychedelics as there's something, oh my God, challenging. It's like, guys, lest you forget that for the last few thousand years, allegedly anyway, maybe much more, we've been interacting with these plants. I mean, why do you think these plants are so resilient? I mean, ayahuasca vines will grow through cement. Mushrooms, good luck getting rid of those. You're going to have to get rid of everything that poops on the planet because they literally grow out of shit, right? Like ergot fungus, right, will grow on everything. I mean, these things are so powerful and so strong.
Yeah. I mean, the Immortality Key by Brian, his last name's hard to pronounce. It starts with an M.
Yeah.
He goes through the old sacrament and how there's all these old rituals around ergot and other psychedelics, the funeral beers from the Vikings that found, they found psychedelic substances in that. The ancient Egyptians had a gold topping to their wine that was antibiotic. Plants have been medicine for ages.
Yeah.
And I microdosed psilocybin for 4 months, 0.15 every fourth day. And I've never taken anything like Xanax or anything. And I'll tell you, that was better than any Xanax or anything that's out there. Like,
and I mean, you talk about safety, right, as well. And now it's actual science, right? So for anyone listening who's like, I don't know, well, unless you're smarter than the people at Johns Hopkins, I beg to differ. But, psilocybin is the safest substance on the planet. It's even safer than cannabis because cannabis, mostly you have to inhale it, right? And there's actually, this is something that I like to talk about a lot with cannabis. Like cannabis is second on the list. And why I believe that is true is because cannabis is a very tricky plant. Most people don't know how to work with it. And that's why I love working with it. They interact with it. And for a long time, it might just work. And then one day they start getting anxiety and then they just start moving away from it. And with psilocybin, it's more of a guided experience, right? Like you were talking about, like even the times where I've been scared, there's always something guiding it. Like, yep, you're going to move through this. Then we're going to grab you by the shirt collar if we need to and drag you through this. So at the end, for me anyway, I'm always at some sort of conclusion, even if I'm like, well, that was interesting. And I don't know exactly what that was. I'm at least at this conclusion point. Where cannabis, you can just be sent into the abyss, right? You're just there. There's nothing really guiding you. It's very similar to LSD in that respect, right? Where it's a choose your own adventure. And so it's up to you to guide yourself through. Whereas with mushrooms and things like that, it's much more of like they're guiding you and they have a certain spirit to them and everything. And you were talking about feeling like a weight was lifted. And, to bring back that analogy of how, these things have been talked about for thousands of years, ancestral trauma, past life trauma, right? So many people use their left brain to try to think of those things. And they're like, that doesn't make any logical sense. It's like, well, does love make any logical sense? Can you tell me how much love you have for each person in your life in units of love? No, you can't, but you still feel it and you still know it exists. Not everything is measurable because certain things are quantitative, right? Things that can be measurable, and certain things are an experience that you just have to be able to even start to quantify. And, I see that being what we've been talking about this whole time with every experience that we've both gone on with psychedelics. It's an experience. right? It's a right brain activity, and life itself is a right brain activity. The more you try to left brain yourself through, that's where I feel a lot of the mental illnesses and things like that are coming in, because we as humans have not ever learned what the mind is, what its role is in our lives, and how to use it correctly, right? The mind is a servo mechanism. You give it a goal, and it's a goal-oriented mechanism. So say you want to lose 30 pounds in, 6 months or something, right? You can give that to your mind, and then you can start to drum up ideas of like, okay, I'll go to the gym this often, soft talk acknowledged. I'll do this, I'll do that. But at the end of the day, you might go to the gym and start doing your own workout, the one that you thought was going to help, and it doesn't work. And all of a sudden some trainer's like, hey, I can help you, blah, blah, blah. I'm actually much cheaper than most trainers. And if you surrender to that, you're like, oh, okay. Then all of a sudden you start hitting your goal quicker and you surrender to the process. The mind is just the one that makes the goal. The experience part is much more of like the process of getting there. And that's what manifestation is and everything. And that's why kids have so much fun. I was talking about this the other day, I think on a call, where kids have so much fun in life because they just know, I want to have fun. And then they look around and they go, dump truck, that's fun. They run over there, and then eventually that's not fun. And they look around, they go, Legos, that's fun. And so they don't care how the hell they get there, right? It's adults that unfortunately only think the mind is real, which is like they become their identity. They become Ryan or Chase, right? And there's nothing else than that. And so, they start playing with something, for instance, maybe they start playing guitar and they're like, okay, this is fun. And then it stops being as fun, but they're like, no, I have 30 more minutes. I have a schedule. I play guitar an hour a day. And then it just starts fucking up their whole life. And that's where the mind runs amok. And so, I'm curious for you, having done all these psychedelic experiences that you have done and been a part of, how is your mind these days, right? And of course, you've done a lot of other work too. And I want to get into that as well, of like what some of the tools you use are. But for right now, just as like an overall picture, how easy or how much easier is it, if it is easier, to understand what roles the mind works well in and what roles the heart and the other parts of you work well in your daily life? How easy is that to do now?
That is so much easier that it's harder to articulate than recounting a 5-MeO experience.
Yeah.
Now, there's the complete trust in intuition, separation, and so much so that it becomes easy to forget that there's still guys out there that believe that the job for 40 years and the house and the family is what's going to fulfill their energetic being. Because are we a mind in a body, or are we a body in a mind?
Yes.
It's infinitely easier when you've had that kickstart and that jump start of let me separate from myself for a bit, and you realize what power is available when you separate from yourself. Then, and I love that you had your first interaction with Wim Hof for a few days yesterday, because I did the same.
Oh, nice.
To that point, I had been stuck, like upregulated, and I tracked it on the app, and I went 155, 215, and then my third breath hold, 4 minutes and 20 seconds. That was a coincidence too.
I was going to say coincidence. I think not.
Yeah, no such thing as a coincidence. The cannabis is calling me after a month off. And how many guys are stuck in where doing Wim Hof, they wouldn't even get to a minute because they're so stuck in their narrative and their identity of what they believe they should be, even though they've never, to something you said earlier, they have yet to actually think about what they want or who they want to become.
Yes. That's why I think one of the most potent questions, and I love asking this, especially to adults, is who do you want to be when you grow up? Right? Because I feel we go through stages of evolution, and the way we're taught in society is, hey, if you're 18 and you haven't figured out what you want to do for the rest of your life, you fucked up. Right. And that is so hilariously silly. And to your point, it's really challenging for me sometimes to have conversations with people who haven't done the work in any way or interact with psychedelics or just gone on a life path where purpose is the biggest value, because it's so much if this then that. Well, I don't really like what I do right now, but I make good money. And they start logicking happiness, and happiness is not a logical thing, and joy is not a logical thing. And what I feel is that as a society, we have a disprioritization or prioritization, whatever way you want to say that, in what our core values are. Like we've seen with COVID and everything, that we prioritize safety, right? And at first glance, this is like, oh, great. Yeah, everyone wants to be safe. But at what cost though, right? Mm-hmm. If I told you, Chase, I can add 5 years onto your life guaranteed, right? But you can never hug another person. You can never be around them. You can never interact with another person. You can never dance with another person. You can never enjoy music with another person. All of those things. Would you say yes to it to add more life onto your life?
Well, I'd say no, because I know you're lying to me, because studies have proven that community is one of the biggest, like if like one of the top 2 or 3 things to increase longevity.
Yeah.
Longevity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even had I not known that, I'd still say no.
Yeah. And it's like and then the question begs why, right? Wouldn't you want more life? And it's like, well, what is life constituted by, right? Are you simply alive, right? Just alive in a room alone, or are you living? Those are 2 different things. And for me, I prioritize living as a value over everything and experience, right? And so, not to mention all the actual quantifiable scientific measures of what loneliness does and all these things. And this is what is challenging about especially working with men, right? Is that they've been so ingrained into thinking like we're providers, all these things that do make sense, but the way in which you provide is like you have to go trade time for money, this weird concept. And maybe when you're 65, you'll get to retire and enjoy your arthritis, you know? And
you have men that are, it's this narrative that has been fed to feed your point of, yeah, you get the job and you support the family and you're not ever allowed to talk about all the struggle. And also you're supposed to have struggle because you're a man. Yes, and that struggle isn't to be voiced to anyone because it's too heavy for them to deal with. So just put it on your shoulders. And when it manifests as cancer or arthritis or as an affair or a body you're unhappy with, or your kids repeating the same patterns, even though you tried to use all that income and success to set them up with life, but they still energetically saw what you were giving off, then you're left feeling with a complete lack of purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a man without purpose is a deflated man. And that's what we're seeing in society right now. And that's where I see psychedelics being able to really jumpstart, boys being able to become men once again, because we have a lot of adult babies and adult boys running around. And it's the same for women. We have a lot of adult girls running around, right? Women need this stuff too, but because we're both men, we're talking about men. So if you're a woman listening to this, we love you too, but we just know men more. but it's an epidemic,
One of the things I would love to work into my coaching in the future, if it became feasible and, something I could work around the legal system to make it happen without having risk, is to bring an experience, a deep experience like 5-MeO into my program. Yes. And have it like this high ticket, the higher tier where I go to them and like, hey, we've been working together for 6 months now. Here's the next ascension. Mm-hmm. It's going to be me and you with a 5-MeO ceremony. We're going to work some stories and then we're going to go into it.
Yes, dude, I love that. And yeah, like that is where legally we are heading. Thank goodness, right? With all the research coming out, you can now actually get registered as a legal therapist. You can work with legal churches that can work with ayahuasca and such. And it's great because the tide is turning, right? To leave this episode on a very good note. Like I truly believe we're living in the best time in history, and every single thing that's happened from the pandemic to, everything that's going on politically, everything is happening for us. And it's happening for very good reason, because a lot of people, because of the pandemic, realized that they are not in a good spot and that they're not actually happy, right? They couldn't distract themselves. And what a beautiful gift, because if they choose to work through that, even if they never interact with a psychedelic, even if they just start doing mindset stuff and, taking care of their bodies better, spending more time with family, those things are going to help our society and our culture and our species evolve at an alarming rate. And so thank goodness that we had the pandemic. Thank goodness that all these things have happened. Thank goodness all these medicines have been legalized for so long, because now we really are going to appreciate and be able to actually do real good research to help them become legal. And that's awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah. I had Anat Perry on my show. We recorded an episode this week and she was talking on this thing. The apocalypse will breed an awakening.
Yes, absolutely. And again, because of interacting with psychedelics a lot, I'm like, all right, the other side's always worth it. It's going to get messy, but hey, if I don't have faith, then what do I have? Like my little cute saying that I say is, who wins in Star Wars, right? Like it might look like the Sith is going to win, but at the end of the day, they're missing what is everything, which is love, right? They're coming from a place of unlove. So all of their force is just that, force, where the other side has power, and it's infinite battery life because it's coming from love, which is the source of everything. And I know that because I've experienced it.
Love it.
Hell yeah, bro. Well, dude, this has been an absolute blast getting to riff with you, getting to chat men's work and how your interactions with psychedelics have helped you develop as a man, and what lessons you've been able to come back with, and all of those things. Where can I send people to find you, connect with you, do some of the work you offer as a coach, and all of that stuff?
Appreciate you asking. Instagram at coach_Chase_Tolleson, and soon to come, under construction right now, chasetolleson.com.
And my final question is, if someone listening was just swayed by you to experience psychedelic medicines for the first time, what would Chase Tolleson suggest to give them the smoothest experience possible?
NN-DMT. You can dose it very, very specifically. It lasts all of 10 to 15 minutes. It will open your eyes without ripping your soul wide open like 5-MeO would. You go with like a 0.03 NN-DMT and wade in from there.
Yeah. And the best part is, guys, there are, like we were just talking about, there's lots of places that you can go do this stuff legally. Find someone who knows what they're doing and do that and experience it, right? A lot of these things that we talk about are not things you can measure. They are things you have to have the experience of, right? If these things interest you. I firmly believe, like I've said many times before, not everyone is going to be ready at any point in their life to do psychedelics. And so use discernment, be safe in doing it. And yeah, try some NN. It's very interesting. If these things interest you, find someone who does it and reach out. Hell yeah, man. So guys, Chase is, like I said in the intro, someone who has been able to interact with psychedelic medicines in his own life in a way that has allowed for him to not only gain benefits in the realms of emotional, mental, and spiritual health, but also as a man maturing through the stages of his life in the 21st century. Speaking from personal experience, I too have found this to be one of the most potent aspects of psychedelics as a man, in their ability to help us understand the nature of life and our role in it. If you listened to this episode and felt called to understand the work Chase does with men's work at a deeper level, then please do yourself a favor and reach out to him, as the level of expertise he has in this emerging field of men's work and the role psychedelics can play in that work is powerful, potent, and needed in today's world that is lacking in many of the rituals men have been taking place in for thousands of years. Chase, thank you so much once again for getting onto the show to riff with us all today. And until next time, my friend, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.